My dad has never been the type to deal with confrontation. He avoids arguments like the plague, stays painfully passive, and never once in his life stood up for himself. If someone accidentally bumped into him on the street, he'd immediately apologize as if it were his fault. If his boss shorted him on a paycheck, he wouldn't even think about correcting it. If a mechanic messed up his car, he'd just shrug and drive it as is. Growing up in that kind of environment was chaos for me because my mother was a raging narcissist who controlled every inch of his life. She manipulated him into quitting his job and turned him into a stay-at-home dad who was basically her servant. Every chore fell on him, and she insulted him constantly while cheating on him left and right. She didn't even hide her affairs. Sometimes she brought other men into our house. It was like her personal hobby was making his life miserable, and he never once fought back. Thankfully, my extended family tried to step in and be there for me as much as they could. They begged my dad for years to leave her, but he always refused. And when she turned her anger toward me, screaming, insulting, belittling, he never had the guts to defend me. Not once. If I cried to him about how mom treated me, he'd sweep it under the rug or tell me to just let it go. Sometimes he even tried to justify her actions. As I got older, I realized just how messed up all of this was. When I turned 18, my mother happily kicked me out of the house, and my dad sat there in silence looking sad but doing nothing. I enlisted in the Air Force almost immediately and got stationed across the country. Honestly, I could have gone down a really dark path, probably ended up as some bitter incel if it wasn't for therapy and the good people I met along the way. It took me years to claw my way into a healthier headspace. 2 years after I left, my mother filed for divorce and absolutely destroyed my dad in the process. A year after that, she died in a drunk driving crash with one of her affair partners in the car. When I heard it had taken her hours to die, I felt an awful sense of joy. That reaction was the moment I realized I desperately needed help to deal with everything I was carrying. Now I'm pushing 30, I've got a girlfriend who's probably the best thing that's ever happened to me, and she fully understands the mess I came from. I've learned, or at least I thought I had, to stop letting all that anger and resentment consume me. I try to channel that energy toward building my future instead. I've kept my contact with my dad to almost nothing since I left. As much as I've tried, I can't form any real connection with him. Recently, though, I went to a family reunion and brought my girlfriend along. Since it was his side of the family, my dad was there too. Most of them don't like him either, but blood is blood, so they tolerate him. I made sure to avoid him, sticking with my uncles instead. But then I overheard him talking in the background. He was telling people about a coworker who had just discovered his wife was cheating and was getting a favorable divorce. Instead of saying his coworker should take the win, my dad went on about how the man should forgive her, focus on unity, and set a good example. He even said he believed he had set a great example for me in that way. It was like a switch flipped inside me, and suddenly I was 18 again, full of rage. After all these years, he hadn't learned a damn thing. I turned around and asked him if he was actually serious. He started stuttering, and then I just exploded. The words came out like word vomit. I can't remember every detail, but the gist was brutal. I called him a pathetic father and a pathetic man. I said everyone in the family already knew he was a disgrace who would rather watch his own son be mistreated than stand up for him. I told him he was nothing but a coward, that no one would ever respect him, that mom would rather sleep with half the neighborhood than touch him, and that he was delusional to think anyone saw him as a role model. I started rambling in my fury until my girlfriend finally pulled me away and drove me home. The second I was away from him, I felt better. She held me when we got back and told me it was okay, and in that moment I knew for sure she's the best thing in my life. Still, I felt ashamed for losing it like that. I know I need to get back into therapy, no question about it. But at the same time, I was relieved that I finally said everything I had bottled up for so long. The extended family is split on it. One of my uncles told me it was about time Dad heard it straight from me. My grandparents, on the other hand, were furious that I called him out in front of everyone. Some people think it should have been done privately. Reading through the comments afterwards, a lot of people told me it sounded like I finally released years of pent-up emotion, even if the way I did it wasn't ideal. They said therapy is the right call to keep working through it. I even admitted in replies that while it felt cathartic, it definitely wasn't the most appropriate way to handle things. Other people thought I was just misdirecting all the anger I really had toward my mom and dumping it onto my dad. They pointed out that he was also a victim of hers and probably needed therapy himself. Some even said my rant sounded like something my mom would have said to him, and that worried them. I admitted that yes, he was a victim, but he had a whole support system he refused to use. He let me be victimized my entire childhood because standing up was too much effort for him. And to this day, he doesn't believe he needs help. One comment stuck with me. They said my anger is misplaced, and I'm acting more like the mother I despise. But the truth is, I do hate her. She's dead, though, so holding a grudge against her feels pointless. What I had hoped was that after everything, me cutting him out, his family mocking his failures, his wife draining him in divorce, him ending up in a tiny apartment with no friends, he'd reflect just once and admit he should have done things differently. But he never has. So yeah, that reunion blew up in a way I didn't expect. I'm back in therapy now, because I know I can't carry all this forever. Some of the comments I came across were nothing but rants about double standards or just incoherent rambling about women, definitely not helpful in any way. Still, reading them reminded me of how easily I could have ended up like that if I hadn't had the right support system in my life. Others tried to paint my dad as this gentle, sensitive, humble old man while making me out to be some kind of bully. That right there was a good reminder of how enablers of abuse keep getting away with things, because too many people forget they're part of the problem when they defend that kind of behavior. There were also people trying to psychoanalyze me or catch me in some kind of gotcha moment, twisting parts of my story just to pick me apart. A few were so ridiculous I half expected them to start asking for my skull measurements or something. By the next morning, though, I knew I had to start cleaning up the mess from the night before. The first thing I did was sit down with my girlfriend and give her a sincere apology for losing it in front of her. She reassured me that I didn't need to worry. She's known me for years, always seen me as level-headed, and she understood why I snapped. She grew up dealing with her own narcissistic family, so she knows the dynamic firsthand. The only advice she really gave me was to work on finding a way to still be around my extended family, since my dad is always going to be present at those gatherings. I promised her I'd figure something out and told her I was going to get back into therapy too, which she was glad to hear. Next, I called my grandparents to apologize for ruining the family reunion. I told them it wasn't the right time or place to unload on my dad, and that even though it felt good to finally say what I'd held back for so long, it should have been done privately. I also explained that while I love spending time with them, since the family always gathers as a group, my dad will always be there too, and for now, I just can't handle being around him all the time. I told them clearly I wasn't giving any ultimatums or trying to control their choices. I just needed to step back when I felt overwhelmed. While I was explaining all this, I kind of went off on a tangent, and my grandfather had to cut in and calm me down. He told me that after I left the reunion, people slowly began leaving, and eventually they sat down with my dad one-on-one. Apparently, seeing me blow up the way I did triggered my grandmother into having a bit of a breakdown herself. She ended up kicking him out that day. My grandma has always been extra protective of me, so watching me in that state must have set something off in her. Then my grandfather told me something I didn't expect. It's been something of an open secret in the family for years that my dad has failed in his role. His brothers have called him out, his relationship with them is strained, and even my grandparents have always felt uneasy around the subject. But after seeing how much it still affects me, they finally realized just how deep the damage really runs. They even started apologizing, saying they wished they'd done more. I stopped them immediately. I told them they'd done more than anyone could have reasonably asked for, and I meant it. It was emotional, but eventually they told me they had decided to distance themselves from my dad. They even gave him an ultimatum. Unless he does some real soul-searching and gets consistent therapy, their distance might become permanent. I know my extended family has been reaching out since then, offering to call or meet up, but I asked my grandparents to tell them I'm fine and that they don't need to keep checking in. I also apologized again for making the reunion fall apart, but they told me to stop apologizing for being hurt. Some relatives have sent messages saying it's okay, while a few older ones have criticized me for disrespecting my father. Finally, I decided to reach out to my dad directly. I texted him and asked to meet at a local coffee shop for one last conversation. When I got there, he looked rough, like the talk with his parents had finally broken through to him. I had a million things I could have said, but instead I started by asking if that coworker he gave advice to actually took it well. He admitted that not only did the guy ignore the advice, but most of his coworkers don't even interact with him anymore. Then I asked him straight out if he truly believed that every single thing he did for me as a child was really for my benefit. He stayed quiet. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in me for years, if he had any regrets about the way I was treated growing up. When I asked my dad if he thought he'd ever done anything wrong, he just looked completely broken. All he managed to mumble was that he could have done more. I could have pushed him further, ripped into him again, and gone on another rant, but instead, I told him this was goodbye and that I hoped he'd get the help he needed. Letting out everything I'd been holding back gave me the release I'd been searching for, and for the first time, I felt like maybe I could finally move on. I know I need to stick with therapy, and I'll admit that having a public meltdown wasn't okay, but I believe I'll be alright. Update: over the past couple of weeks, things have taken an interesting turn, and I've learned a lot more about my family than I ever expected. To put it simply, there was so much I didn't know. My father wasn't just passive, he had been a complete jerk to his own family, which explains why they treat him the way they do. I got a lot of feedback online, including people compiling everything I'd shared, and one question that really stuck out was whether my extended family had also played a role in enabling the abuse. Since I'd been working on improving my relationship with them, I figured it was time to ask the hard questions before getting too close. So, I met up with my dad's brothers after they invited me to lunch at a popular spot. For context, Dale is the oldest brother, married with a daughter and a son. My dad is the second oldest. John is next in line, married with one son. And Bill is the youngest, married with 3 daughters. Once we sat down, I didn't waste any time, I just ripped the band-aid off and asked them what my father was really like growing up, beyond the little I already knew. Dale was the one who spoke the most, and he explained that there's a lot of backstory they'd never shared with me before, simply because there was never the right time or place. What I already knew was that my dad was fairly normal when he was younger. He was a little shy, but he did well in school, played sports occasionally, and was close with his brothers. Everything changed in high school when he met my mom during junior year. What I didn't know was that before she came into the picture, my dad was actually a guiding figure for his younger brothers. He was seen as one of the kindest, most promising people in the family. My grandparents adored him, and he was basically the golden child, but nobody minded, because he had such a bright future. The problem started when my mom latched onto him. At first, her behavior was just rude and distant toward the family. They didn't like her, but since my dad loved her, they tolerated it. Slowly, though, she became possessive and began isolating him, convincing him to give up his ambitions and goals. His family grew more and more concerned, spending years trying to talk sense into him, but he refused to listen. When I was born, my extended family confronted him again about her attitude, and instead of hearing them out, my dad got angry and even threatened to report them for harassment. He was in complete denial about who she really was. Things only got worse. When Dale's wife struggled with fertility, my mom sent her vile, cruel messages. Dale, furious, went to confront my dad, but Dad told him to drop it and even defended her. That fight got so heated Dale ended up punching him, and the police nearly got involved. From then on, Dale hated him. John's breaking point came when my mom mocked his son's mild physical disability. Instead of standing up against her, my dad cracked a joke about it, which only deepened John's hatred. And then there was Bill, the youngest, who had always idolized my dad. Bill told me that years ago, my mom actually made a pass at him, and he urged my dad to finally get a divorce. Instead of listening, my dad unleashed a tirade of hateful, relationship-ending words at him. Bill said it was like watching the man he looked up to vanish completely. To sum it up, the more time my father spent with my mother, the more he began to mirror her cruelty. Whenever the family saw signs that I was being abused and tried to intervene, my father threatened to falsely accuse them of even worse things. My mother had money and lawyers and could make their lives miserable, and he was more than willing to let her do it. So they were stuck. They could only help from the sidelines. The older generation, my grandparents, great-aunts, uncles, still clung to this old-fashioned belief that family must stick together no matter what. But the younger generation? They wanted nothing to do with him. It left everyone caught between loyalty and survival. My uncles told me more, but the bottom line was clear: my dad threw away everything, his future, his relationship with his brothers, even his dignity, just to stay with my mom. And when she died and left him broken, he had nothing to show for it. My grandparents, from what they said, don't really want to admit that he's completely lost. Or maybe they just hold out hope that one day he'll get his act together. Who knows? There was so much to process, and all of it was finally confirmed when my dad himself called me to ask about doing family therapy together. I cut right to the chase and asked if everything I'd heard from my uncles was true. He admitted it was. At that point, I might have considered some sort of family therapy, but after hearing that, I honestly didn't know anymore. Update 3. After sitting with everything, I made the decision to cut my father out of my life for good. The more I learned about who he really was, the clearer it became that nothing good would come from keeping him around. I also decided to step back a little from the extended family on his side, at least until I had more time to process. There are layers upon layers of things I need to work through. I met with my dad one last time at a coffee shop. I asked him the question that had haunted me for years: why? Why did he let his wife treat everyone like garbage? Why did he turn on his own family? Why did he let her walk all over me too? I demanded a real answer, and after fumbling around, he finally said it was because he loved her. That was it. He loved her. No matter what she did, no matter how much pain she caused, he clung to her because he was too insecure to risk starting over. She was the first woman who gave him attention, and he latched on until she destroyed everything. I got up, told him to fix his life, but made it clear I would no longer be a part of it. He could word things however he wanted, but the truth was simple: I grew up with two abusive parents. He just stared at me in silence as I walked out. That leads to what happened next. Last night, my grandparents called me and said that the night before, my dad tried to reach out to his brothers and make peace. The problem was, he did it in his usual half-hearted, avoidant way, never taking any real accountability. After everything that had just come to light, and with old wounds ripped wide open, his brothers unloaded on him. They gave him a verbal beating that made my rant look like nothing in comparison. My dad didn't handle it well. He hung up, went home, trashed his entire apartment in a fit of rage, then packed whatever he had left and drove off. The family only figured it out because one of my uncles went to check on him. From the few texts he sent, it sounds like he's completely snapped. He's talking about driving across the country to start fresh, but at the same time, he's acting vile and bitter, lashing out just like my mom used to. Edit, things spiraled so fast I honestly expected it all to crash down within a few days. I held off on posting until I had the full picture. Update 4, January 9, 2025. For anyone still following, I'd say it's finally over, or at least wrapped up as much as it can be. On my end, my girlfriend, now my fiancé, and I are planning our wedding for later this year. As for my father, he did survive, but he lost everything. After his breakdown, his apartment complex barred him from returning and is pursuing him for damages. He has no job anymore. He's currently living with my grandparents and, for the first time in decades, is actually taking responsibility for his choices and relationships. It's too late for most of the family, but his parents are giving him some support now that he's finally trying. The extended family as a whole, though, has exploded. My dad basically became the symbol for all the deeper family problems that people had been sweeping under the rug for years. Once he was called out, everyone else's issues came spilling out too. Old feuds reignited, some relatives stopped speaking altogether, and a few couples even ended up in marriage counseling or family therapy. A lot of them don't want to follow the family above all mindset anymore, which has created even more distance. My fiancé and I decided it's best to pull back from all of it. We were disappointed, but seeing how toxic the older generation is made it clear we couldn't rely on them. My side of the family has its own baggage too. Thankfully, we have an amazing group of friends who support us, and honestly, that's enough. So that's it. I'm ready to close the book on this and move forward with a life that isn't weighed down by bitterness. I'll hang around a little longer to answer questions if people want details, but as far as I'm concerned, this chapter is done.